thanks, John, and to the BSA for this event, for the 6 years of the BSA PhD student residency with UL, and for the exhibition 20 Years of Artists at the British School of Athens, which is held at Europe House in Smith Square between 22nd of July and 17th of September. Now, when I toured the exhibition, I was struck by the following quote next to a painting by Anna Ilsley, who unfortunately can't be with us this evening. She said, "The time and space I was gifted in Greece was absolutely pivotal to my work and provoked a massive shift in the context of my painting." She also commented that her time at BSA initiated a process of critical questioning of, quote, which version of history to draw on in my work. So we've got two things there, a transformation of practice and a critical engagement with which version of history she's going to draw on, which I think is really interesting. Now, the transformative effect of place and context on the work and attitudes of artists is something we perhaps don't take enough note of and pay enough attention to. And in this respect, the exhibition made very clear that the past, present, and continuing influence of the BSA on the artists was very manifest. And if you want a bit of a kind of reference point here, in 1961, the head of the Surrealist movement, André Breton, declared that a visit to the Gustave Moreau Museum in Paris had, quote, influenced forever my idea of love. Now, that may seem a wildly exaggerated claim, but I think the statements accompanying the works in the exhibition in Smith Square attested to this kind of transformation. The practice-based students at UL who have become BSA residents have told us how transformative their residencies have been for their investigative practice as PhD students and for their practice as artists, and how their experiences in Athens continues to influence and inform what they do. And we're now going to hear the BSA residents talk about this experience, and we'll be able to, as John said, we'll be able to put questions to them afterwards. And the first person we're going to hear from is Vanessa Gardner, who is a painter. Over to you, Vanessa.
Hello, I think my presentation will be on in a minute.
Right.
John's doing it.
Excellent.
Yeah, okay.
So I'll start it now, Vanessa, okay?
Thank you.
I'm Vanessa Gardiner, and I was a bursary holder at the British School, Athens from 2009 to 2010. As a landscape painter, I've always been drawn to the natural geometry of coastal regions, and although the highly structured cliffs along the coastlines of Cornwall and Ireland have long been sources of inspiration, I had believed for some time that there were connecting aspects in my work which might correspond to the clarity of light and lyrical precision found in the Greek landscape. In 2008, I visited Greece for the first time, and the bursary awarded by the British School at Athens the following year validated these initial thoughts and enabled me to embark on a series of exploratory visits which proved to be immensely rewarding. At the time of my residency, there was not the studio space to use at the BSA as there is now, and both for home and for work reasons, I decided from the start to make a series of separate visits to Greece throughout the year. This, in fact, fitted in well with the process of how I work, returning repeatedly to specific places of interest to glean more information to use in the paintings in the studio. A dialogue then opens up between the landscapes, the drawings, the paintings, and back to the landscapes, and I find the physical distance to some extent can even be an advantage. I'm pleased I decided to spend the time this way, as it meant that I had the chance to travel and to see both the different aspects between places, as well as discovering apparent similarities with the Cornish coastlines I know so well. I had the benefit of returning to the same places at different times of the year, and I also became acutely aware of the significance of the sea and the way it connects the country together, being in a sense as much a positive as the land itself. Entering this new subject matter of the Greek landscape was exciting, and my initial thoughts were how I could depict the places and still remain true to them in my paintings. I felt it essential to use the opportunity to draw as much as I could, knowing that some drawings might not all be of use to me at the time, but that I could refer back to them in the future. And so, staying in Athens at the BSA at the start of my bursary year, I began by drawing the Acropolis from the south slopes and from the Pnyx. I find that it is through drawing that I start to truly look and imprint and interiorize a lasting image in my mind, and notice the idiosyncrasies that characterize the Greek landscape, the singular pure line of the hills, the sharp quality of the sea when it abuts against the coast, and the coexistence within the landscape of an elegant linearity with strong architectural forms. I tend to use small sketchbooks as I find they are more practical to hold, and often I draw across the 2 pages, and sometimes if I find the landscape I'm working from is larger than the space I have to use, I have a mechanism for folding the pages over and working on the next sheets, so being able to continue the drawing that way. From Athens I made journeys out to the coast, and the experience of first seeing the panoramic landscape at Sunion on the tip of the Attica Peninsula was profound, and I remember consciously thinking that there was so much that I would like to do with such a beautiful place. Here the sea is often an intense cobalt blue which can have an unexpected opacity about it, appearing at times to seemingly float as a solid band of dense colour across and between the headlands. The light on the Attica promontory is often particularly crystalline. It is a clear, sharp light which enhances the purity of the lines of the pale grey hills, studied and mottled by scrub. The broken paths and roads as they traverse the hills appear to swing across the contours of the land. I recognised all these elements as parallels to the visual language I use in my work. I think I must have made over 15 trips to Sunion, often at different times of year, picking up the bus in Athens for the 2-hour journey along the Attica coast for a day's drawing. It seemed to me that this one place somehow encapsulated the whole of that expansive Aegean landscape and inspired a number of paintings. Later in the year I went to the Peloponnese and made a series of drawings from both Mycenae and Tiryns. But 2 singular landscapes have been particularly inspirational. The austere long headland which juts out into the Argolic Gulf at Nafplion, and on the same stretch of coast the dramatic fortress of the Palamidi, which stands vertiginously on the summit of the rocky cliff commanding a view of the whole of the bay. I made many drawings of this panoramic line of coast, and a series of paintings have followed. Here the sea is a palpable turquoise and different to the cobalt blue on the Attica coast, as it forms a sharp line against the grey peninsula. There is a distinct wildness here, an untamed quality about the landscape. I then carried on down to the Cycladic island of Paros, initially to fulfil a long-standing wish to see Delos, which I did, but I also became unexpectedly attached to Paros, and with the inland village of Lefkes with its Byzantine route down to the sea. The painting process I have developed over the years is a crucial part of the work and involves a continuous series of procedures. I paint in acrylic on plywood or hardboard. Frequently I will redraw the image, scouring and sanding back the paint until the surface becomes abraded and enlivened, taking on a patina and revealing qualities of its own. I might work on a series of 6 or 7 paintings at a time, rotating them in the studio as I go, so that ideas from one will feed into others. At the end of the year, I put on an exhibition in the upper house at the BSA of all the drawings and watercolours I had done. With well over 100, I initially needed to place them on the floor to give me an idea of how best to hang them. In essence, they were the source material for my larger studio work, and I find that I continue to use them for reference when I'm working from Greece. Since then, I've made frequent returning trips, quite often staying at the BSA, which have continued to enrich my work profoundly and have resulted in a number of solo exhibitions at the galleries which represent my work, both in London and elsewhere. I know that the bursary and these consequent visits to Greece have had a marked effect on my work, informing my painting style and introducing a new visual language which feeds at times subliminally into my pictures of other coastal landscapes. Even recently, when returning to the North Cornish coast and drawing from a familiar viewpoint near Boscastle, I was vividly transported back to the rocky promontory at Sunion. I see this process as ongoing and not something that has a definitive end, one which I hope will continue to sustain my work for years to come.
Thank you, Vanessa. Thank you very much. I'm now going to introduce Eleanor Wright, who has a practice which embraces art, craft, and industrial process. It's quite varied indeed. And Eleanor was a BSA resident in 2016, I think. So over to you, Eleanor.
Sorry, I'm just making sure it's actually playing. I have to do it manually, so. Okay. Dear Eleanor, thanks again for the intensive studio visit yesterday. I think it really helped to get a better grasp of your project. The images of the vacant Ria shopping centre in Athens still reverberate, which, scrupulously cleaned and sun-drenched, look like the idea of an icon of modernistic architecture. Not only because this ideality of a showpiece is rooted in Greece's precarious economical circumstances, but perhaps also because of the romantic tragic figure, which is the architect. Possibly, we don't know that much about Yannis Kontodamus. His furnishing of the building emulates Frank Lloyd Wright and the other big men of architecture of a certain time, with every single piece of furniture, fixture, and door handle being made for the building. The fact that he took up this understanding of an autonomous architecture in the early 1990s, of course, resulted in it completely falling out of time, especially with the dark woods, which he used as a nod in agreement with Wright again and again, but when used in a shopping centre seemed strangely obtruse and out of place. For someone to indulge so much, inadvertently producing so much vacancy by overlooking the necessities of the situation. You mentioned that even in the block of flats he built, all the apartments except for the one he inhabits are unoccupied, is rather superfluous. You probably know Ferdinand Cheval's Palais Ideal. The shopping centre reminds me a bit of it, not formally or anything, but because of the devotion of the autodidact, which makes it incredibly difficult to take up a critical stance on his exaltation. Admittedly, he didn't build completely without a purpose. After all, he lives and works in the buildings and keeps the centre open to the public. I think yesterday's visit was also important because I could see how living and studio are one in your and the Sam's apartment. Work life and your off space, Drop City, don't occupy different functional rooms, even though there is the possibility to segment the space using the space dividing curtains when needed. The more I think about it, it seems to be this utopian echo of a spatial conjunction of work and life that interests you at the Ria shopping centre, and its spatial openness. Because what makes the centre relevant is the problematic dominance of the planning personality, which in the pursuit of an artistic ideal makes too many stipulations, making the building completely unattractive to deviating functions and aesthetics. And if you cannot bring yourself, you will hardly feel at home, even with a shop. The resulting emptiness of a building that is accessible to the public, and moreover, a very beautiful one, holds the possibility of appropriation. Sorry, my preview has stopped working.
Oh.
Bear with me. Okay.
Oh, good.
Let's find my spot. The resulting emptiness of a building that is accessible to the public, and moreover a very beautiful one, holds the possibility of appropriation, of a public use that is not subject to any planning regulations. Such places of assembly, of unexploited existence, are ultimately missing in every nook and cranny. Most likely our societies are crumbling because there are hardly any spaces in which something like community comes about. The filter bubble has long been a city planning dogma. That's why I think your idea of making Petra's gallery, with only a few installations, into such a place for gathering and staying for your show is pretty good. Most of all, because it imitates one of those planning statements that architects are constantly making, mostly with the best intentions for the community, but still risking to build past the reality. I look forward to it. With best regards, M. Hi, Ellie. Thanks for your reply. You're probably right that it's unfair of me to accuse Yanis of having produced vacancy. If he built the apartment with the intention of having his family move in bit by bit and not renting it out in the meantime, not least because Greece clearly has a very different culture of renting, then that's totally understandable. And it goes without saying that he didn't conceive of his mall, which actually functioned for a good decade, as an empty glass palace. But he now insists on the building's special design, and he won't make concessions to potential tenants, which certainly hasn't improved the situation since the economic crisis, helping to keep the place empty. And this is a point I'd like to focus on. I told you how, for me, the building's emptiness turns it into something like a space of possibility, and you often speak of it as a fictional device, a view in which its current lack of function surely plays an important part. On second thoughts, my euphoric reading is perhaps rather naive. After all, empty offices and shop units have long since become the norm, as a symptom of an investment-driven real estate sector where being out of use is no problem for investors as long as the buildings exist as assets on paper. Don't get me wrong, I'm not talking about Yanis. I just find it interesting how the phenomenon of vacancy, whose current scale is a result of the financialization of the real estate market, meets in the Ria shopping centre with another kind of vacancy caused by the economic crisis sweeping all the shops out of Yanis's complex. And this is interesting because the two are linked. To recap, Greece didn't descend into crisis because the Greeks liked to drink wine and get up late, even if some people would have us believe this. Instead, the notorious credit crunch of 2007 and 8 was triggered by American banks recklessly granting loans to people who wished to fulfill their dreams of buying a house in the suburbs and then making them pay excessive interest rates to fund overblown yield expectations, something they were eventually not able to continue doing. But to return to the necessarily contextless quality of modernist buildings that I also attributed to Yanis's shopping centre, this severing of links to the building, also referred to as the third skin, has now progressed further still. Today, the ground on which a building is erected is no longer assumed to be a piece of level terrain. In Singapore or Bahrain, the ground may be imported from Malaysia, Vietnam, or elsewhere. There is also the rather loose, even abstract connection between the building and its owner, which, especially in the case of empty office blocks, often means an international real estate investment fund. My point is this: the broken link between building and setting is something that's also sometimes attributed to modernist architecture. And this adds a new level to your project, since in Yanis's case, in a conservative, holistic way, these links are intact. This means that, once again, he's an anachronism, which I mean here in a wholly positive sense. Maybe you won't agree with me on this, but the subject of your work has a dimension linked to global commerce, and even if it's not an aspect you emphasize, but maybe I'm underestimating you. After all, you did have those ropes made, whose pattern picks up the dominant colors of the photographs, and of course the colors typically used in the Athens typical polykatoika apartment blocks. Ropes being the product of rope making, a now dried up sector of the Greek economy that also points to maritime trade, decorative trimmings, and the beginnings of global commercial networks. Oh, and I totally forgotten the time. I've got to be at the station in 15 minutes. I'll get back to you soon. It took a while, but now I can pick up the thread of what I was saying. Excuse the pun. Like I said, I like the way the ropes refer to maritime trade, and thus also to both the distance and connection between the United States and Greece, simply because this illustrates the cause and effect of vacancy in Yanis's shopping centre, as well as the stylistic migration from Frank Lloyd Wright to Yanis and his buildings. The architectural similarities are obvious, of course, but you're clearly also interested in a specific self-image, a specific angle on the job description of the architect. So it's very clever to play this interview over footage of the centre, where it remains unclear who's speaking, Wright himself or Howard Rourke, the character based on Wrights by Ayn Rand in her novel The Fountainhead, or maybe even Yanis. Whoever it is, their sometimes obnoxious decisionist individualism is beautifully superimposed on the building, which is funny because negative public reactions to the empty building generate feedback, as if ordinary people, as shoppers, were boycotting the architect. In the central shots, shot on the roof terrace, the Polokatoika slip into the picture again, which strikes me as no coincidence, contrasting with architecture that understands itself as the shaping of society. I'm talking more about Wright than Yanis. This extremely successful typology stands for an adaptable vernacular architecture. A single structural unit permits a wide range of potential uses and modifications. And it is this adaptability of the Polokatoika that is always cited as the reason for their success. I've already speculated about the degree to which Yanis's refusal to adapt might be responsible for the current vacancy of the shopping centre. In this way, the film itself is already confrontational, even if the calm shots in which the occasional gentle breeze blows don't make it look that way. And there's no need to take sides or speak out against the Polokatoika all the more, and I assume that's not your intention. It's enough that the two are related to each other as aesthetic and social models, giving contradictory answers to the same questions and bringing different qualities with them. Although I do get the impression that you're making a small statement against the architecture's oblivion to context by dyeing the ropes, these anonymous tools of sailing in the dominant shades of Athens' facades, Polokatoika. You probably wouldn't agree with that. So I'll put it differently. An emphasis on context seems important to you, which in turn reveals a perceived oblivion to context as the product of a specific context, which makes it possible, on the next level, to discuss something like responsibility. I can't go into more detail on that here, but I think you understand how this links back to the design responsibility I mentioned in my first letter. Looking forward to discussing this further. Warmest greetings to you and to Sam.
Thank you very much, Eleanor. And now we come to Annabel Dover, who, as John said, was our first PhD BSA resident from UAL in 2017. And Annabel is an artist who works in a variety of media and also writing, but I know her best perhaps and have long admired her lovely watercolors. Anyway.
Oh, thanks.
Annabel, over to you.
Thank you. Hello. I'm just trying to get my PowerPoint done. Hello. So mine will be much more ad hoc, I'm afraid, because I'm just going to show you a collection of images and just say, as I see them, what I think. But yes, it certainly had a huge and continues to have a huge impact on me. The BSA and Athens. Sorry, not least because you will see coming home from nursery soon, I have a little boy who's biologically Greek, he's biologically Athenian, and I got him via IVF in Athens after being at the British school. Okay, hello. Right, now it's nicer, isn't it, to do it as a slideshow. Looks nicer. I think how I do that. Sorry. How do I do it as a slideshow, everyone?
You just go to view, and then
View.
yeah, and then
Oh yeah, let's see.
yeah.
It's nicer because it fills it up, doesn't it? Oh, hang on.
You need to go into PowerPoint again.
Oh, thank you.
Come out.
Oh, sorry, everyone, and thank you.
Slideshow at the top.
Yeah.
And then from the beginning.
Thank you. Thank you. Should work in a minute, I'm hoping. Okay, so I was there in 2017. Hopefully, here we go.
Good, you're there.
Thank you for being
All right.
patient. So I was there in 2017, yes. This isn't very useful, is it? Where do I put that? Go away. Can you see this bit? Yes, you probably can.
See it all, don't worry.
Sorry. Okay, so before I went, I was very interested in the idea of the archive, and I had a strange childhood. My mum left when I was 13, and my father had already gone. My sisters had gone. And she went to Athens to have an affair with this sort of exciting Greek man, and she sent me letters. So Athens always had a kind of interesting sort of mythical quality for me, the places she visited. And when I went, and before I went, I wanted to go to the places she went to and have a look. But when I was talking to John Bennett, the director, he was talking to me about the accidental nature of archives, or incidental archives. And the idea, he mentioned the clay inventory tablet that was found at the Palace of Knossos and then fired by the fire there, and so is preserved. So this sort of accidental inventory. Sorry, how do I get, come on, this? No, come on. Sorry, everyone. Oh, here we are.
You're there.
Okay, so yes, when I was walking around Athens, I guess my mum's a kind of gleaner, and I suppose I am in a way. And I think Philippe Stark said that you can really understand a lot about a city by its rubbish. For me, the rubbish of Athens was quite amazing. And at that point, when I was there was a strike as well. And so a lot of the rubbish hadn't been picked up. I remember looking at a pile of stuff and it sort of seeing it moving and realizing there was a rat underneath it. And this sort of reminded me of when I was young in Liverpool in the Toxteth riots. I guess, yeah, I found it very hard to be in Greece and to remain sort of apolitical. I guess I think it would be quite hard to do that. This was a place I often went to have a look. There was a group of children that I came to know later on and befriend, who would steal the leftover biscuits that were put on the teacups of the kind of dieting rich Athenian ladies who drank there, and they'd get a complimentary biscuit which they left. And I found it interesting, the stuff I could pick up there. It was a sort of scene I saw that on the left, that is the hotel, some of their ironwork, and it was re-gilded. And it was a sort of be a scene that would be too ludicrous to have and sort of heavy-handed to have in a book. But there was a homeless person who was asleep under this, who was getting covered in flakes of gold leaf. Just, I guess, the contrast, just the amount of poor people that I saw there was shocking, I guess. And I suppose is often an indication of what might be going on politically. So anyway, I collected the gold leaf, which I will show you in its new life soon. Documental was happening at the time, and that was a source of contention for a lot of people. It was an interesting project by Rashida Hareen, who put free food for people that they could come and collect in the center of Athens, and a lot of people came who were poor, and a lot of people from Documenta came, so very rich collectors. A whole group from Sotheby's came and sort of sat down, seemingly oblivious, eating the food, which was an odd sight. so this is a hospital that's near the British School, and at the time a former Prime Minister had been injured. It was about May 2017, had been injured by a letter bomb and was in there, and there were lots of police and guards outside. And on the right, that's an image of some of the things I found outside the hospital, which now, of course, has very different meaning, but this was pre-COVID. This, I think I read either on the day or the day after the ex-Prime Minister was admitted to that hospital. And it was, I was reading The Guardian just to, I suppose, see what was going on, or I guess also I was looking at the archaeology sections and different things. I think I was sort of doing maybe what lots of sort of expats do, and looking at sort of what's going on in Britain. And this had been leaked photos, and it was interesting for me because it was the political, it was seen as showing the bomber in too human a light, because it showed, I suppose, his vulnerability. That was his rucksack, and it's ripped. So it showed, I guess, that he sacrificed something as well. This was Archaeological Squeeze, which was an amazing technique that one of the people there, Robert Pitt, showed me. It's used for as a sort of epigraphic aid to help read a stone which has maybe been worn away. It's to see the indentations or to see the carving more clearly. And it's something that was sort of used in one of the pieces at Documenta, and this was at the Archaeological Museum, where they had printed rubbish that they'd found in the street with paper and a stamp. So I did some of my own from graffiti. There's one on the left is, I faked it. I carved into a rock, a piece of rock at the art college in Athens. And this is based on, I'll show you in a minute, piece of graffiti that was in the Stoa at in the ancient Agora in Athens. And then these are on the outside, the willy, as I'm coyly going to call it, was on the outside wall. And then the other writing was actually, I thought it was maybe Roman, but I think it's actually just Victorian. Well, sorry, that's a British term, but of sort of 1850s. And that was found elsewhere. So I think I've put Tom Walter, The Morning of Diana here, just because in that, Tom Walter talks about the idea that it was interesting when Diana was mourned, everyone kept the flowers in their individual cellophane to sort of maybe commemorate themselves. And I guess the idea that each time someone dies, is it commemoration of yourself or the person? And the Morning of Diana was a sort of odd thing. I found it interesting, the conversations I had with taxi drivers in Greece as well. Often they got on to Margaret Thatcher, what a great woman she was, and also Princess Diana, which I was quite surprised about, but yeah. When I was in Athens, I missed my husband. This is actually Burt Reynolds. And I'm sure you know the bottom one is the Oscar Kokoschka doll, which was sort of modeled on his, at the time, current lady. And he eventually destroyed it. And at the bottom left, you can see the Alcatraz. Yeah, so I thought in my inner sense, it would be quite easy to get one made of Alex, my husband. And I went to this really nice seamstress who's quite near the British School, and asked her about it. And she seemed really horrified. place. I mean, I didn't even get to the point of showing her naked photos of my husband or anything like that. And then I came back, and a few weeks later, I was talking to the very nice librarians at the British School, and they were really laughing about it, having coffee, and were crying with laughter, saying that they thought I was a witch and that I was going to do something really strange. So what kind of fascinated me about that, I guess, was the cultural difference. And I don't know how that would have been taken if I'd have asked for that to be made in Britain. But anyway, so I just went for a simple head instead. And the very nice hairdresser down the road gave me loads of hair, this sort of beautiful dark Greek hair. And I made out of the Greek newspapers Alex's head, and he went to sort of hang out in the ancient agora. These are some objects I made out of plaster and some out of jasmonite, mostly plaster. I suppose I like the idea of it sort of being a classical Greek material, and I then used the gold that I'd found from the hotel and to gild them, which made it was beautiful, extremely high carat gold. So that was nice. There's you can see there's a few different things. There's quite a few earplugs. I made quite a few more, and I don't know if you can see, there's a tiny little gold doll down there. They're called Frozen Charlottes or Frozen Charlies, and based on a German story. There's one of a spoon, and I distributed them around Athens near the ancient agora. There were some really fascinating archives, and still are, at British School, and the albums really interested me. And at the time I was reading about Freud having his collection of objects put into an album when he came from Vienna, and Queen Victoria having so much stuff, she had to put it in an album. These are some of the paintings, and they are watercolors. They're made with pigment that was obtained from the plants of, or I can say perhaps, as it's an archaeological site of interest, near the ancient agora Athens, and the mica from the rocks. The mica from the rocks was obtained by an amazingly skilled engraver from one of the jewelers near the ancient agora. So there's a sort of row of jewelers, and there's a row of people, it's like sort of furrier workshops and people that sell fur, and they are of objects that were found there. This was an amazingly interesting talk that I heard at the British School, and this is by Chrysanthi, who was at the time, what do you call her, John? The deputy?
Assistant director.
Yeah. And part of her research focused on the idea that this festival might have been with naked girls sort of preparing themselves possibly for the trauma of childbirth, and this goddess being a bear. My very good friend Justine, who is extremely kind, let me dress her up as a, well, you know, just with the mask, and we did this quite a few places around Athens. This one I borrowed somebody who is an archaeologist there, her camera, Lucy, and I couldn't control it at all. I just couldn't turn the flash off. I was going to do it very slow, but in the end I quite liked it because it sort of added to the thing, you know, the element of surprise. And also when we walked down to the bottom of the hill, there was this group of police in their cars that just had been there the whole time at the bottom of the hill, all cheered and did a round of applause to my friend Justine for, you know, putting on this naked show for them. This is taken, and this was called Go Home, because I asked if you, well, I asked look, there's such an amazing amount of rich knowledge, and people know so much at the British School in so many different ways. And I asked somebody there if they could come with me and tell me what the graffiti said, because it was often, well, it was in vernacular Greek. It wasn't, you know, something I would be able to look up. This one was just go home, and that's what this is called. This is just the color of the plant after it had been sprayed with the graffiti paint, and I'd taken it off. Not this, but a similar work based at Calais, from the weeds at Calais, is now in the Imperial War Museum. And while I was at Athens, I mean, this isn't under sort of the guise of BSA, but this is just something that I did. I told you that I met these children outside the hotel, and I was talking to them, and also I was sort of researching where I could help with any refugee, you know, in any way, refugees. This is City Plaza Hotel, and it went bust in 2007. And I guess at one point was quite a sort of flashy hotel. I guess it has echoes with Ellie's, the shopping centre. It has a lot of sort of tinted glass, and it's kind of interesting to see how the aesthetic has been completely changed by it becoming this squat that was given over to refugees. So I began to volunteer there, and I took photos. It was mostly children and women, but it was also any men were usually ill or older. So I started taking photos of their objects and collections, and this is earth, bags of earth, and this was really common to see. And people talked about when they got to the home they wanted to live in, they'd like to plant something there or just have a bit of the earth. This for me was quite shocking, this image and this one, because that's just the state of the toys after they came on the journey from their home. So there was I did see the children and people after they arrived, and it was quite, it was really shocking. There was just mud all up the stairs, and the state people were in, I guess, it was hard to believe. These were some things that the children collected because they'd never seen cigarettes with lipstick on in their culture. That was just not, I hadn't seen that. And this relates to something sad. I quite often went to the Archaeological Museum with about 3 or 4 of the children. And when we were there, it was Easter, and they got given quite a few Easter eggs from British charities. And one family, the grandfather died, but really I think the father wasn't alive, so really he was their sort of father figure. And they said, one of the children said they'd like to make a death mask with the Easter egg foil, which kind of sounds ludicrous, but it was just very sad. Now I can't remember how I do this. I think maybe I have to untick that, do I? Don't know. You don't. So they asked me if I could make them a record. I'm not sure if this will work or not. See if you can hear this, but don't worry if you can't. Can you hear that?
You hear it, yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
So there's a few things they wanted. I think you might have heard a tiny bit of the Scots owl, which is. So those were I gave them some very cheap, very old-fashioned tapes to collect sounds they wanted, and then after quite a few votes, meetings and votes, that those were the sounds they chose. One of them was the sound of them playing musical instruments on the underground train, which is how they made a small amount of cash. Yeah, I wanted somewhere they talk in different languages, because I was amazed that they could often talk about 3 or 4 different languages easily. And these are just some of my residing images of Athens. I loved it so much. And the amazing Scops owl and the hoopoes and the tortoises having sex, which was just unbelievable. And those beautiful dogs. One of my amazing images is of a hen party, and they were running through the city, and a group of the stray dogs that were very well looked after were running with them. It was kind of joyful against all odds. So thank you.
Annabel, in that context, when you said hen party, I thought we were going to see a party of hens, but never mind.
Oh, that would have been nice. Riding on the back as an Aesop's tale. Yeah.
Well, thank you all. I've got some. I mean, obviously, it'd be nice if you began to talk with each other, but I've got some questions of my own. And the first is a kind of archaeological question. It could be answered literally in terms of an object, or it could be something something existential or spiritual. But beginning with Eleanor, what did you find out? What did you discover on the residency?
I guess because I made a proposal for the residency that was actually focused on the much more focused on the failed, if you want to call it, failed Olympics, and all the buildings that I guess it's very, very different to like how the sort of post-Olympic landscape has worked with London. They've really and in many other cities, it's been made a big success as far as I understand. And in Athens, it wasn't. So I'm trying to sort of recall when the Olympics was, but when I was going in 2016, it was several years afterwards, and so a lot of the buildings were in a state of disrepair, dereliction. And then, so that year, the previous summer was the refugee crisis, and they were using some of the buildings to house refugees. I had originally, I guess the answer to your question is that what did I learn is that you can't prescribe what you're going to experience on a residency. You go through the whole interview process. They ask you, what are you going to do? Where do you want to go? And you go, well, I'd like to do this. And usually I always come up with something that has some kind of architectural, social aspect to it, I guess. And I found the narrative of the Olympics and this kind of architecture, this new architecture in this old city, like compelling enough, a starting point. But then when I arrived, it just felt so completely inappropriate to be sort of sticking to that line. And so in the end, I didn't have a plan when I arrived at all. And I just started walking around the city. I think a lot of people do that when they go on residencies in new places. They walk. And what was good about Athens is that it's way less sprawling than I thought it was going to be. I mean, I stayed at the BSA for the first 4 nights, but then I went to stay in an apartment out near Attiki and getting the bus in to the studio every day. And then I moved to another apartment somewhere else so I could get the tube a bit more. But it just meant I had a complete sort of, yeah, a very interesting, I guess, relationship with the peripheral parts of the city, but also to realize that it is a very walkable city. It's not this sprawling, fearful place that I think I thought it might have been ahead of going.
It reminds me of a remark that one of our ex-PhD students made once on an open evening when he dramatically pulled aside the curtain at night to reveal Tate Britain and said, "That's my studio." It was Kimati, by the way.
Very
Thank you. Vanessa, what did you discover?
It's very different in a way. I suppose I've discovered that it was, I mean, I discovered the architecture within the landscape in a sense. So when I was walking around Athens, as Zanine was saying, I did a lot of walking as well. And it's the way the architecture sat within the landscape was very interesting for me. And before I even went out on the sorties to various coastal places, the just seeing and walking around the slopes of the Acropolis and discovering Piccionis's very beautiful walkways through the slopes of the Acropolis and up to the Parthenon, and I found that very wonderful, really, relating it to my work and being able to relate it to drawing. And so I sort of found it related much more closely to the way I work, in a sense, the actual landscape and the architecture within it, I suppose, is how I found it, really.
Did you do more drawing on the residency than you would normally do, or?
Yes, because I think I probably did, because when I was there, which was 2009 to 10, there wasn't a studio, so I had to actually do a lot of drawing in knowing that I would be taking these drawings back to my studio back in Dorset and working from them. So I spent the whole time drawing, in a way, and looking and drawing and walking and bringing things back to the hostel and sitting at the desk and drawing when I was there.
Annabel.
That's it, yes.
The classic politician video, Annabel.
Yes.
Mummy! Mary, do you want to come and say hello? Mummy? Yes.
Hello, you're on telly.
Mummy? Yes. Mummy? This is Larry. Yes.
Hello.
Yes.
And Annabel.
Yes. I think
What did you do? Apart from-
it was probably communicating
Yeah.
with people and hearing their stories was pretty fascinating.
Yeah.
And they weren't at all what I thought they would be. You know, the Margaret Thatcher comment that I kept hearing, I was quite amazed by. But then just learning, just so much to learn, and hearing about the riots and the different parts of Athens being so differently, and the bit where the police really go, and I've forgotten what it's called, but John will remind me. Exarchia, yeah, which is almost a sort of anarchistic place where a friend and I saw a guy come in, just take all the food and not pay for it. Yeah, and that the police just stay on the end of it, and then me trying to research. I mean, just so much to learn. I guess I was just so ignorant of it, even though I'd read before.
Well,
yeah.
Well, just to say, I mean, looking at the photographs of your friend with the headgear and the naked,
Yeah.
it seems to, in a way, you discovered the wild or the feral in Athens, which is perhaps, I don't know, did you expect that?
Definitely I did. No, I mean, I saw some really shocking sights just when I was thinking, oh wow, I'd love to live here, and I saw somebody reverse onto a pile of kittens, and somebody sort of injecting heroin in their eyeball. And I mean, you see shocking things everywhere, but I guess, yeah, that was quite fascinating. And I'm trying to write a book at the moment about my experience of Athens. So, I mean, I think I started writing there in Athens, and it's definitely someone that inspired me to write, I guess.
Oh my God, I thought growing up in Belfast was bad, but that sounds...
Yes, well, actually, it's something that you say, that there were elements of that because I lived in Belfast for a little bit. And yeah, there were elements of that that reminded me of that actually, yes.
What interests me is actually just watching the three presentations, and then it just reminds me of how very diverse the BSA is in a sense, and the fact that all these, there's anthropology, there's history, there's art, there's archaeology, there's all these different things that are going on, and actually the three presentations were so very different in a sense that that you know, it's interesting that comes out of this in a sense too.
Well, in a sense, it's you know, rather like the experience at art school that I had in the early 80s, which was the days when the kind of, you know, you got a space and somebody said, "I'll see you in 3 years."
Yes.
Oh, what do I do? And but it's just that kind of openness and ability to kind of just roam far and wide that I think was amazing, is amazing, and continues to be so fruitful for the. But then having
the base of the British school is what sort of there's a kind of place to return to. So I would go out to these sorties out to draw, but coming back to the British school Athens was a very nice part of my experience in a sense. Yeah. So
it was nature and culture, so to speak. But just to shift to go back to Anna, because I was really intrigued by Anna Isley saying, you know, my version of history changed, and I suppose to ask you the same question, whether that's art history, the kind of art history that you understand as an artist, or your own version of it. Did your version of history, either as an artist or the history of Athens or history in general, change during the residency, Eleanor?
I guess along the lines of what I said to your first question about having sort of, you know, prescribed or ideas of what a place might be like ahead of going, and that being, I guess, confirmed in some ways, but more often than not, really not. Like it felt, it did feel like a contemporary city, but it also had this very strong, I guess, strong traditional sense in some of the trades that I was seeing. Like in the center of town, you can go along certain streets where there'll be like a whole street dedicated to lighting, and then a street next to it dedicated to door handles. And that kind of quite old idea of how people would shop and trade is something that I'd never really seen before. You know, maybe you go, like I live in Antwerp now, you know, you have the diamond district, that's where you go and get your diamonds, but it's in Athens, it's really, and I guess probably in other parts of Greece too, I was mainly exploring Athens, it's the same thing. And so yeah, I think maybe that's enough of an answer to the question.
Of course. I mean, I suppose what intrigued me about all your presentations was that there was history in there, because you know, a lot of people perhaps who haven't been to Athens would think of it, you know, as ancient Athens. But even though there was ancient Athens in those presentations, it was all done spatially. All the history was conceived spatially in terms of roaming, walking, discovering, uncovering. Vanessa, I mean, particularly in terms of art history, perhaps, did your version of history change?
I don't think it really did particularly, but I was very interested in that the idea that there's the history of the 20th century feeling of the 20th. I suppose I felt there was the history of the 20th century there with architects such as Piccionis and Geeka and the painter Geeka, and I went to the Museum of Geekers, and I think there was I found it very interesting connecting that period with the ancient period, and then the way the city is contemporary at the same time. And I don't think it changed my view of it particularly, actually.
Well, there's no reason why it has to. In a way, I was just kind of, in a sense, it seems as if for looking at your work, what you did was incorporate that Athens within, as it were, as you said at one point, well, I usually paint this way. And Athens became incorporated into that mode of painting. But
I think as far as painting concerned, it's definitely changed the way I look at things now, even because there's a different visual language that I saw in the Greek landscape and the architecture within that to the particularly the Cornish coasts that I was painting. I paint. So there's a kind of linearity and an elegance and a less sharpness in a sense. So when I feel I need to go back to that, I sometimes go back to Greece to see a different appearance in a way that I want to incorporate in my own work. So there's that that I find interesting in a way.
I mean, I suppose what I'm saying is I saw, you talked about two kinds of blue. One sea was one kind of blue,
Yeah.
was another kind of blue.
Yes.
In a sense, that was the kind of, subtle but crucial difference you were noticing, and then
Yes.
gets fed back into the Cornish.
Yes, I mean there are those subtle differences I found them very apparent, and when you're going from Attica, where there's the pink landscape, earth, going into Corinth, and then going towards the Peloponnese, and it changes to ochre, and these things are different, and the Peloponnese landscape was much more, I felt, was more wild and stranger in that sense to the Attica, which was a different landscape, again, elegant landscape in a way. So there's subtleties that I very much noticed actually, and seeing Mycenae and as a citadel sitting within the hills, and seeing it sometimes in the summer when it's incredibly arid and dry, and then seeing it in the winter when it suddenly becomes green and you barely recognize it. And all those things were extremely interesting and very continue to feed into my work here.
A whole new way of looking at space and light and colours.
Absolutely. I mean, it's the light in Greece that is so different, that I found was so different. The light and the clarity and the precision of the landscape, or the architecture, and it.
I mean, all your benchmarks go. I remember one standing in a cave in Cappadocia and thinking, I've never been this hot, and I don't ever want to be this hot ever again. It's like all the things in the UK, suddenly the scale is completely different. So Annabel, what about your version of history?
I think, yes, it definitely changed. I mean, I've mentioned Margaret Thatcher several times. I had a totally different perspective of her growing up to how people perceived her in Athens, or some people perceived her. Yes, I think the language thing was very interesting as well, as I said, in the refugees being able to speak so many different languages. I guess because they had to, partly. I think just seeing different religions as well, and just sort of, I suppose maybe, I guess, everything changed completely, I think. Yes, and I was sort of quite shocked at how different it was, and kind of really wished I did believe in God and things like that. It's just so beautiful going to the church at Easter and sort of being surrounded by people in a way I'd only previously been when I grew up in Liverpool in a football crowd, I guess. So yes, and then of course coming back to Britain, again, I kind of saw it in perspective. I think, is it Ang Lee that talked about directing Emma? I'm not sure if I'm getting that right, but saying how for him it was really interesting doing something so peculiarly English, as somebody who wasn't English, and just how I guess the way of viewing the world, it just food. Yeah, I think everything changed my perspective. Plants, I thought I'd look at the plants and that would be kind of enough, but even that, how they were categorized was different, and how they were viewed when they were first categorized was different. Linnaeus's idea on those and animals. So yeah, that's kind of magical.
I think it's sufficient to say that it blew all of your minds, so to speak.
Definitely, absolutely, yeah, and continues to.
Before we go go to Q&A. Do you have any questions for each other on what's been said? Not obligatory.
I was going to say to Eleanor, what's happened to the place? Is it sort of in aspect? What is it? Is it locked up, or is it used, or is it just kind of as we saw it in the photos?
The shopping centre.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's as far as I know, it's still there. The last time I went was in 2018, and Yanis is still there working.
So he's the only sort of living part of it, is he?
Yeah.
It's sort of J.G. Ballard, isn't it? It's
Yeah.
clinging on.
He although it's quite serene, so not as dark as Ballard, but yeah, he's still works there. I think he's in his early 80s now. So and he's quite a lonely figure, as perhaps you could imagine a bit. It's quite a melancholic situation. I mean, he fully designed this shopping centre, and yeah, like I said, it in this letter, so those letters that I've read out were formed like the exhibition text for this exhibition I made called Pre-Public Scenery, which was more or less the combination of the residency. Yeah, it's still there, and you can just walk in. He just keeps the building open. He doesn't have a sign saying come in or anything, and it has a cinema on the roof, but sadly that's been out of action for a while. But that's how you find it on Google Maps. You can Google Cinema Ria, and that's how you find it. But I just found it by walk. I just walked in one day, and people, like locals, use it as a cut through because there are doors on both sides of this. It's on a corner on this quite busy intersection, and so people kind of use it every day, but maybe they don't want to go up the stairs. But I just went and knocked on his door and said, "What is this building?" and and asked him if I could come back and make a film. And yeah, so very welcoming, but also very guarded fellow.
Amazing. Right, we have, if you could just turn your mics off for a second. We have some questions. The first question is not to anyone in particular, it's to all of you. What drew you to Athens in the first place, and did your expectations, vision, perception of Athens change during your residency? For anyone?
Well, should I?
Yes, please.
Sorry. I went when I was. I'd been to a residency in Ireland, and I haven't been to Greece before, and I've always wanted to go, and so I was looking at residencies in Greece, and this kind of I found the British School Athens on there, and I applied that way. But I suppose I just always felt that I was obsessed with Greece as a child, and I did a lot of drawing from the Ashmolean because I was lucky enough to live near Oxford, and it just finally I was able to get there, which was and it I guess that's what drew me to it in a sense.
In a sense, you'd already prefigured it.
I had for many years, but in fact I'm quite pleased that I waited until I was actually 48 before I went there, because all the work, somehow I saw it in the work before I actually went there, and then I wanted to see whether it was right to needed to go there, and indeed it was. I guess that's
the other Freud thing, isn't there, about seeing the Acropolis and whether it's a disappointment or not?
Yes, I didn't find. I mean, part of the wonderful thing about going to BSA being a resident is you have a permit to be able to go up as many times as you want. So you can get there at 8 o'clock, and it is actually amazing at 8 o'clock in the morning. With that before people arrive. So it lived up to its expectations, I think, for me.
Anyone else?
For me, it was, I guess, just the thing from my mother's letters. Can you hear me? Sorry. Yeah, and I wanted to see what they were like, and there were a few bad sort of photos as well, but just, I guess, they were so different. And of course, the kind of closer I got to the things, the sort of further away her letters became in a way, and the memories were sort of, it didn't help at all. It's blotted out, if anything. Yeah.
So in fact, the prefiguration wasn't as useful as you thought it might have been.
It's not, I guess it wasn't that it was useful, it's just the relationship of the two was so distant.
Right.
I guess the present didn't blot out the past, that's not quite right, but it certainly didn't make me feel closer to her. I guess emotionally it was confusing. It wasn't sort of this, everything's all sealed up and I understand now. It was just odd, but that was kind of fascinating in itself, and actually helped me make more work. So
The main thing for an artist.
yeah.
Yeah, I guess for me it was at the time I was very interested in this whole notion of like city branding and how a city might represent itself to the outside world. And I guess that's why I proposed to focus on this, the new old Olympic site. Like, so how does Athens reinvent itself for the modern age? That was my kind of entry point to it. So sort of, I guess that narrative fits with what I was looking at the moment, at the time in my work. But then again, like I said, I didn't actually pursue that sort of subject matter, even though in a way it kind of came through with the shopping centre that I became very obsessed with. And yeah, I went back to Athens several times over the years to make more work, and also to work with this rope factory. So lots of things came up that were unexpected.
Thank you. I know John has a question, but before he does, somebody said, what do you think about archaeologists? Are there similarities between their work and the work of artists? How did being surrounded by archaeologists and science influence your work?
Yeah, hugely, if I can just say very quickly. I mean, I went to all the lectures and that was really amazingly fascinating. And when we were talking, I guess, briefly about languages, I mean, the language of archaeologists was kind of amazing. I didn't know about epigraphy and, the way that images were sort of analysed. Yes, for me, definitely the objects and the stories and how it's so living and constantly being rewritten and changed. I found, very enriching. Yeah, I don't want to take up other people's.
Yes, I agree.
Yes.
I was just going to say I agree entirely, and actually going to the Fitch lab was really exciting, and I was rather unexpectedly delighted by the fact there was these sherds and these wonderful pots and the chemistry in the lab and then seeing rocks which I'd got in my own studio, which so it did relate actually to how I to the lectures and then meeting people at the school, both archaeologists, anthropologists, historians. It's a wonderful mix actually, which totally relates to your own work, totally relates much more than you expect to certainly to painting in I found. Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, I actually quite liked being the only artist on the in the building, and like Vanessa said, the sort of mix of people,
Yes,
historians, archaeologists, and having conversations with them, like like at the BSA, just in passing at little events that would happen. I did attend talks, but really my focus was more on kind of exploring the city and letting that just affect how I treated my time there. I was very receptive, things, sort of to finding things, I guess. And I actually spent a lot less time in the studio because I found it a bit hot, and a lot of time in the library. I just have, I mean, yeah, because you get your own spot, and I just read all the Greek myths, and just kind of, I don't know, yeah, just had a really nice time, kind of being not lonely as such, but just like kind of on my own, and then dipping into what other people were doing there, and their focus being, I guess, like related, but you know, from a different vantage point, different set of parameters or knowledge finding, but essentially all contributes to something which is, you know, quite a rich mix.
Thank you. John, what was your question?
Well, first of all, let me just say that from our perspective, I mean, I've been at the BSA for just over 6 years now as director, that having an artist present in the community has been enormously enriching, and every one of them have been different. I mean, Eleanor and Annabel overlapped with me. Vanessa, sadly not. She was before my time, as it were. But everyone has brought a different aspect of richness to the community. But I had 3 very short, very specific questions, one for each of you. And my question for Vanessa was I was intrigued by the way you described the difference in color tone between Attica and the Peloponnese and so on. And as it happens, we've been re-looking at the Lears that we have in our collection, and I wondered if you have feel any sort of affinity to Lear as a landscape painter in your own.
I absolutely love his drawings and his watercolors. I'm totally feel an affinity with him. I'm not quite so keen on his very elaborate paintings, but his in the Geeka Museum there are 2 or 3 absolutely beautiful drawings of Lear, and yes, and I like the way he writes on his drawings. He writes the color, and he you know, with no photography then, he was having to write everything down and get it down, and the urgency of that, feeling that need to draw, get the color notes down as well. Absolutely, he's one of my very favorite draftsmen, actually. Beautiful drawings and watercolors. Yes.
Interesting, yeah. And we saw the coiled rope cones a couple of times in the images you showed, and you just alluded to the rope factory. But I wonder if you could say a little bit more about that, because that was one thing that really fascinated me about what you encountered and what you uncovered while you were here is the rope factory.
Yeah, it's Mentis, Center for Preservation of Traditional Textile Techniques. Catchy, but Mentis is, yeah, you can remember that. And it's actually a company that was that started in the early 1830, or a little bit later. But it's a sort of very key part of Greek industry, this company, and they, despite the letter sort of talking about maritime trade and the ropes being for that, it was decorative trimming for like military costumes, or like the sort of trimming you get around the edge of lampshades and sofas. So it's passementerie is the actual product that they're making. And I can't remember when exactly, maybe 10, 15 years ago or so, the company folded, or there wasn't enough trade for it to survive. But it has all these archaic machines, which some are over 100 years old. And the Benaki Museum stepped in to take the machines into its care. So now it runs Mentis as a kind of living, working museum. And they don't really advertise this, but you can visit it. They advertise that you can visit it and you can have a tour. But the people there are incredibly friendly. don't speak much English, but it was possible to essentially communicate, oh, you're an artist, well, what would you like to make? And that, not even having to, you know, pursue it or ask it was very, I'm not used to that kind of thing. Like if you're going to work with a factory, you normally have to make a, you know, there's a minimum order of 1,000 meters, or you have to spend a lot of money. And with this, I could just make like a small quantity of hand-dyed rope, which I specified the colors. The colors are all from photographs I recorded from the Polykotoika, you know, the Athens architecture, these pastel colors. Specified the pattern, chose the machine, and it was amazing. And then they, I worked with them over the years a few times to make these, to make this rope, which in the end ended up on these ceramic cones, but that wasn't the plan. I just wanted to make something with them, and then the piece of, like, the artwork, I guess, sort of came later.
Yeah, great, thanks. And finally, Annabel, you did some teaching down at the Athens Institute of Fine Arts, and I mean, what sort of different perspective did that give you, as sort of being embedded in yet another academic community, but artistically focused, but in Athens, but not at the BSA and so on?
Really different and very interesting. And it was the students there that really let me know about their ideas about Documenta, that they felt very frustrated. They'd been, hadn't really been asked, they'd just been moved out of their studios, for example. And I guess the sort of political tensions, there were some people, some gallery directors from Germany had arrived, and they were refusing to speak in Greek and to speak in German. So that was, really interesting. It was very interesting to see the kind of work that was being made, and I thought it was brilliant. And since I've had an exchange with some of those students now that they've left, with some Royal College students and vice versa. And there's been a sort of multi-log between them. I found that really interesting, and really interesting in terms of things like they allowed the stray dogs to come up in where they were doing the MA. Just things like that was just kind of really charming, and so opposite from a kind of health and safety conscious UK perspective. I suppose it reminded me of the early days of tutors just sort of lighting a cigarette and, as Malcolm says, sort of leaving you for 3 years. But and I've just been reading this. I've been reading this, and you saying that, and that reminded me of Werner's nomenclature, the thing where he wrote down all the different colours for Darwin to take with him on the voyage, sort of quite poetic descriptions of colour. It's sort of philosophically, it's quite interesting, isn't it? Talking about different types of colour and ways of expressing it, describing it.
It's funny because one of the things, Maurice Douglas, who also did a BSA residency and showed in the exhibition, she part of one thing she showed in her PhD was an illustration of the soil colour chart.
Interesting.
So there's a palette of soil, which I didn't know anything about until Maurice showed it to me.
That's interesting. It's like this cyanometer, which has the skies, kind of the different blues of the sky, which you can visit. So Sue did. Yes, that was, sorry, very quickly, I was amazed when I arrived that you could have those bisections. There was the earth, and you could see, in the underground stations, and you could see bits of the earth. It was amazing.
John, do we have time for a couple more questions? Because there are a couple. We do.
Sorry, yes, we do. Yeah, I was multitasking, so my unmute didn't work.
John, you didn't manage.
Here's an interesting question that you may or may not want to answer. Did you develop any rituals or ways of working while you were there? Not connected with the witch thing, Annabel.
No, I'll just say very briefly, I didn't, but that was what was so amazing, because I was allowed to not be part of my normal life. So I didn't have all the boring things of, you know, the boring everyday stuff. So it was incredibly luxurious. I could just walk for hours. So, you know, I can't usually do that. But no, I wish that was a ritual of my everyday life. But no, it was something much more exciting than that for me.
I didn't have any ritual and nothing like that, but I think I had to pace. You had to pace your time in a sense out there to get enough work done, enough drawing. You needed to get those drawings done that you knew you needed to do in order to have enough information. So I suppose there was a kind of slight change in the pace. And my life here is a studio life, so it's a very different life going to stay at the, you know, staying in a residency and working from the outside in order to get enough to bring back to my studio here. So it was different in that sense for me.
It wasn't like the dressman's contract. You didn't do the same drawing at the same time every day for a week.
Yeah, no. I mean, I went back to a lot of very same places quite often, and in order to do more drawings from that place, in order to know it very well, I suppose. But,
Eleanor, did you have any rituals?
I guess it was wrapped into something that I observed quite quickly, which were all these places where people could sit or gather or not so much congregate, but these kind of quite secluded areas where you'll have like 1, 2, perhaps 5 benches surround, like maybe on their own with a tiny little, in an enclave or like on a little square, but nothing particularly grand, just like a kind of pocket. And I noticed, because I was walking so much, a lot of these spaces, and I started tying them into this thing of the outdoor theatres, and this kind of, I guess, in a sort of tying them together in some kind of metaphorical way about it being some innate Greek thing to gather together in the streets and debate, or there's something about it being outside. And so I guess the ritual was that I went and I took my camera and I was going and trying to find as many outdoor seating areas, whether they have any connection to theatre or not, and that was a starting point for me.
And I think the other question I've got in the Q&A is, are there any Greek artists Vanessa, Eleanor and Annabel admired or came to admire?
Yes, yes, well, there's definitely Gika, there's Piccionis I've mentioned before, and there was an artist called Spiropoulos, Yanis, I think, and I admire them all hugely, actually. So yes, that was good.
Annabel or Eleanor?
For me, it was, I guess, probably the art students. There were a lot, and I loved also Geeka Museum was amazing, and also got to see a lot of other Greek artists that he collected there. I found that really interesting, like his mask. And but I guess it's the young students, and I guess also this sounds a bit corny, but just the refugees, the way they lived their life was so amazing, so sort of tenacious and so kind of inspirational. Maybe they're not artists, but that I really admired the way they lived their life. It's very sort of noble.
Good. Eleanor?
For me, I probably just need to say the architect of he's actually an engineer of the shopping centre Ria, Yanis Kontonimus. So.
who lived in his own artwork or architecture. What could be better? John, I think unless you can see anything that I can't, that's the questions we have.